Well, the International Energy Agency has hailed a deal between the United States and China on curbing greenhouse gas emissions, but says it wants to see results. The agency says it's a giant leap for mankind and a huge opportunity to make a difference. For a little more reaction to the deal, I'm joined now by Dr. James Watson. He's the Director of the Wildlife Conservation Society's Climate Change Program. He's in Sydney for the World Parks Congress. Dr. Watson, let me start with this US-China emissions deal. Is it a game changer in global climate action?
Yeah, this deal between the United States and China is incredible. It is a game changer. It's two of the largest economies in the world saying that it's now time to act. It's now time to act not just for the safety of people, but for their economies. Without reacting and doing something about climate change, they realise that their economies are going to suffer.
Despite all the fanfares, these are just targets, though. It doesn't mean that these nations are actually going to be able to achieve this.
But they're publicly committed to this. They've gone out into the world and said, we are now committed to fighting dangerous climate change. And that's something that's to be heralded. This should be a famous day in terms of the fight against climate change. And hopefully it will force other nations like Australia to step up their fight.
The Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who's been in Myanmar for the East Asia Summit, says he welcomes the deal, but he says his government is focused on its direct action plan. The Foreign Minister says that the government will start to look beyond its initial target of 2020. Is that good enough?
I think looking beyond their target now needs to happen. I think if Australia relies on their current targets, we're going to be well and truly behind both America and China and most of the world around our fight towards climate change. And as I mentioned before, it's not simply about fighting the fight itself, it's actually about developing our economies. We need to future-proof our economies to actually make sure that we can actually adapt to climate change and bring big new jobs into our system.
You're here for the World Parks Congress, and one of the issues that will be discussed is protected areas. There are many protected areas around the world. Australia, I think, had a target of 17% of its land mass being protected, and the Environment Minister, Greg Hunt, says that we're on track for that.
Yeah, the Environment Minister announced the other night that we're actually hit the target, 17% across Australia. And that's a positive move. The reality is that the Environment Minister is focusing on quantity. He's talking about 17% as a series of kilometres squared or hectares. It's actually not quality, and that is areas which hold important areas for biodiversity.
So are we protecting the wrong areas?
At the moment, we are protecting residual areas which aren't under threat. So it means that Australia's biodiversity crisis won't be stopped by putting protected areas where there is no threat. What we need to do is step up and actually identify those areas which are under threat and protect them first as a priority.
Can you see what might be the number 1 or 2 on the list of an area that your organisation would like to see protected?
Well, in Australia, we've got to go to the areas which have been most cleared. In eastern Australia, the woodland belt, the Brigalow belt, has been seriously cleared down to 1% left. Those areas of remnant habitat need to be protected now. The tropical rainforests are under pressure. Southwest and Western Australia have got these fantastic Mediterranean ecosystems, probably the most biodiverse in the world. They're seriously under threat and not well represented in the reserve system. So it's really across Australia, especially where land has been modified for farming and now for mining. Those are the areas which really need to be prioritised to get that quality target met. And
just a final quick question. The areas that we have protected, is enough being done to make sure that they're kept up to scratch, so to speak?
Look, honestly, the answer has to be no. We're not actually meeting any kind of management targets that we've set ourselves. And in fact, it's a trend around the world. We need more work done on not just placing new protected areas in those quality habitats, but it's ensuring that the current habitats that we're protecting are maintained. And what we're seeing around Australia, and unfortunately in many countries around the world, is this backtracking away from putting money into protected areas. And hopefully this Congress now beefs up that fight so we actually can get that back on track.
Draws some attention to it. Dr. James Watson, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.